This is a Game Boy from 1989, which I just bought off of eBay in 2025. I actually remember when this thing got released. I was 8 years old, and it seemed like within about a year, everyone I knew had one. Everyone, of course, except me. Still, I did manage to get my hands on one. For 3 blissful weeks in 1990, my friend Joe lent me his Game Boy. During those 3 weeks, I spent endless hours playing Tetris and Super Mario Land, listening to the same cheerful 8-bit music over and over again, wondering how the games had been made and how their music was written. Game Boy software, of course, came on these little cartridges, which could only be made or licensed by Nintendo. Of course, eventually, people found ways around this. By the late 1990s, reprogrammable cartridges started showing up on the market, which allowed clever developers to write their own homebrew software for the device. Software such as LSDJ, which is what we're going to be using today. I first heard about this software in 2005 when this Beck EP got released. If you haven't heard it, it's really great, and it makes heavy use of the Game Boy's sound chip. So yeah, I've known about this software for 20 years now, and I have never given it a shot. So we're going to try it out together today. Before turning the camera on, I spent about an hour futzing about, and I finally managed to get LSDJ onto this cartridge. I had to use one of my Windows computers, it was a whole thing, but we got there in the end. Okay, I've just powered it on, and as you can see, there's this sort of grid, sort of matrix of dashes on the screen. LSDJ is a kind of software called a tracker. Trackers are essentially musical spreadsheets. Notes are represented by numbers and columns. Each row represents a moment in time. So we start at the top, and as the music plays, it moves down vertically. The controls on the Game Boy are really minimal. Just 4 buttons and a directional pad. To add a note, I hold A, and then I press the right arrow until I get to the note I want. Then I use the arrows to move down to the next row, and I repeat the process over and over again until I have the melody that I want. What we're hearing right now is the onboard synthesizer. The sound chip on the Game Boy has 2 voices of built-in synthesis, which can be customized on this screen. There, that sounds a little bit better. Okay, let's keep going. So I want this pattern to repeat twice and then go to a different chord. So here's an interesting thing. You see how the top of this screen says chain? LSDJ has a funny hierarchy to it. The pattern we just wrote is called a phrase. Phrases live inside of chains, and then chains live inside of songs. And that's the top level of the hierarchy. At first it seems confusing, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Of course, the Game Boy screen is tiny, and you can't edit all of these things at the same time. So I'm going to be flipping back and forth between the different screens. To figure out where I am and how to get where I want to go, there's this tiny map in the corner. Okay, let's add a second voice to this. Through the magic of time-lapse, this is going to look like it only took me a few seconds, but in reality, it took about 20 minutes. I'm still really unfamiliar with the control system. On its own, that's pretty abrasive. Next, I'm going to try to add a lead melody. In addition to its 2 pulse wave synthesizers, LSDJ has this powerful wave channel. It can be used as a melodic synth. There's a wavetable generator. It has drum samples. It can do a lot of stuff. I'm just using it to produce this simple square wave. Now I'm just going to go back into the phrase editor and put together a simple melody. This is what I ended up with. Okay, so putting together that tiny little fragment of music took me about 2 hours. So definitely a learning curve to this software. My personal advisor when it comes to anything having to do with LSDJ is Ethan Desatel, who performs under the name Donut Shoes. Speaking of which, this is what LSDJ can sound like when used by somebody who actually knows what they're doing. Anyway, you'll notice in this video that he actually has 2 Game Boys. He's hooked them together and they're synced up. Every time I turn around, it seems there's some other thing that LSDJ can do that I didn't know about. The developer of LSDJ, Johan Kotlinski, has been working on it for 20 years. And yeah, he's really managed to eke so much performance out of a device that is admittedly pretty primitive. There's also a very active community of people who make music using retro video game sounds. It's called chiptune. In practice, that means that there's a solid 20 years of tutorials to check out as well. In addition to making music on the original Game Boy, it's also possible to make music on other vintage handheld Nintendo devices. About 5 years ago, I ordered this Nintendo DS off of eBay. I had been planning to use it with this Korg synthesizer software, which I bought in 2010. Unfortunately, when it arrived, I realized that it wasn't going to work. The device I purchased was a Japanese version, and this apparently only works on US devices. I didn't know any of this, so I put it in a drawer and I kind of forgot about it. 2 or 3 years passed, and then randomly, the YouTube algorithm offered me up this video. Basically, it explains that you can just jailbreak your DS and then set it to whatever language you want. So I did that, and I was able to play my cool Korg synthesizer. This is a great piece of software, by the way. We're not going to cover it too much in this video because a lot of people already know about it. But there was this side benefit to jailbreaking my DS, and that was that I could now play homebrew software such as Nitro Tracker, which is a piece of music software built specifically for this dual-screen device. In some ways, it's very similar to LSDJ, except that it uses samples, which you can load onto the SD card. Of course, audio coming from the DS still has a crunchy, lo-fi sound to it, and I think that's part of the charm. The original developer of Nitro Tracker abandoned the project a long time ago, but somebody else has picked up the mantle, and you can find new updates under the name Nitro Tracker. So if you have a modified DS, definitely be on the lookout for that. I'm going to try to add a sample of me playing this violin. It's pretty, but the way the violin sound distorts takes some getting used to, especially when I know what the real thing sounds like. Of course, now that we have samples, we can also put in those obligatory drum breaks. That may be a bit much. Let's try to combine it with sounds from the original Game Boy. I kind of like that. Okay, let's talk about other devices. LSDJ's user interface, as archaic and cryptic as it may seem, has been adopted by a lot of different platforms. There's something called Little GP Tracker, which came out in 2006, but is now being maintained by a whole new crew of people. More recently, there's a thing called the Mate Tracker, which is just fantastic. It's basically like if you were to take this, but then carry it to its logical extremes, add a bunch of synth engines, really cool. I should mention it has a price tag to match how cool it is. I think it's a fair price, but that's definitely going to put it out of reach for some people. There's also a scaled-down project called the Pico Tracker, which is available as a $50 kit, and you know I love an electronics project. Of course I ordered it. Along with the kit, I also had to purchase a screen, a battery, and mechanical keyboard keys, all of which have miraculously arrived on time for me to build this kit as part of this video. Another component I ordered is this case. Speaking of which, shout out to Adam from Dead Cactus Labs for printing a white version of the case for me. The first thing I'm going to do is take the main circuit board and make sure that it actually fits in the case that I ordered. The holes line up really well. Looks pretty good. Next, I'm going to solder these mechanical keyboard keys onto the lower circuit board. And here's what it looks like when it's done. Next, we concern ourselves with the screen. We feed the ribbon cable through this slit in the middle of the circuit board, and then we attach it in the socket on the other side. As you can see, I've also attached the battery to the circuit board. Next, I'm going to screw the keyboard panel in. Finally, we slot the screen into place and secure that. And we're done. That's it. To get software and samples onto it, I'm going to use one of these micro SD cards, which I'm amazed I had the foresight to purchase. Ooh, guess it doesn't go in that way. These things never go in the first way you try them. Moment of truth. Hey, look at that. Let's make some music. It takes me about an hour to figure out how this thing actually works. Essentially, it's extremely similar to using LSDJ on the Game Boy, but with samples instead. We start by creating a chain. Inside that, we create a phrase, and then we add notes to that phrase. At the end of an hour, I had myself a quick and dirty little beat that sounded like this. One of the things that made me want to build the Pico Tracker is that it can be used as a MIDI sequencer. Let's try to get that working. I'm going to plug in the Polyend synth, since that has 3 distinct synthesizer voices. I start by entering a simple pattern for this bass sound. Next, I create some variations so it's not quite so repetitive. Next, I'm going to try to pick a sort of slow, warbly synth sound to go over this. That should work. Let's hear them together. Of course, we can also add samples from the Pico Tracker itself. For now, I'm just going to add bass drum hits. Okay, let's hear the whole thing together. I'm going to have to work on mixing it a little bit, but so far I think it sounds pretty cool. Of course, now that we've pressed this fancy synth into service, we're miles away from the cheerful 8-bit melodies of the Game Boy. There we go, now we've come full circle. You know, it might be Stockholm Syndrome, but this music software, LSDJ, which seemed so enigmatic to me at first, it feels totally intuitive to me now. It's funny that I would say Stockholm Syndrome because I think the guy who wrote it is actually literally based in Stockholm. Anyway, there's something really addictive about this way of making music. I think also for people of my generation, there's something so appealing about this idea that you can take old game systems, you know, artifacts from our collective childhoods, and turn them into something new, a tool for making music. And, you know, of course, there's the added bonus that any music that you produce with a Game Boy is necessarily going to sound like something that came out of our speakers in 1990. Echoes of this bygone era that, you know, feels both old and new at the same time, which is pretty cool. I want to thank Ethan Desatel, aka Donut Shoes, who's been my advisor in all things Game Boy. There's a link to his music in the description to this video. By the way, if you want to dip your toe into the world of Game Boy music, you don't need to actually buy a physical device. You can absolutely just use an emulator on your computer. I've personally been using one called SameBoy that I've been very happy with. This video is a bit more sprawling than usual. Every time I thought I was about to be done with it, I decided to tack on another part. I hope you enjoyed my slow descent into madness. If you did enjoy this video, a great way to support this channel is by joining the Patreon. It's dirt cheap, and every month I upload an exclusive sample library just for patrons. Okay, I think that's it. See you soon.